As dads, some days we feel like we have all the answers, and some days we feel like we don't have a clue. If that describes you, you're at the right place. This is the All Pro Dad Podcast. Welcome to the All Pro Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Ted Lowe, and I'm joined today by Mr. BJ Foster. BJ.
Hey, Ted.
Good to see you, bud. Good to see you. Mr. Mark Merrill,
Ted.
President, founder, CEO,
Okay,
just the man
enough.
of
That's
Family
enough.
First.
Let's do it, Ted. We got a serious topic to talk about today.
We do, and I've got to tell you, I have to prep for all these, obviously, but this one, I was like in the middle of it. I'm like, oh, why is my stomach kind of hurt? This is kind of stuff. And the question of this week is, what am I teaching my kids about politics? What am I teaching my kids about politics? And probably this episode, maybe more than any, maybe a little anxious because this topic is so charged and there's so much that's coming with it. But I think what I wanted us to wrestle with a little bit today is, what are we teaching our kids about politics, and not only like what we believe and how we come to that conclusion, but also how are we talking to and about to other people? Like, what is it looking like? Because obviously there's great reason to be impassioned about what's behind politics, but I think we've got to be careful in the midst of this. What are we teaching? What are we teaching our kids? And specifically, what are we teaching them? Maybe how you talk about or to people that you don't agree with, because our kids are seeing all the things that we're seeing, right? They may be seeing it on TikTok, but they're seeing the how polarized that we are. And so I think everybody listening can agree to go, wow, we're watching adults name call and just do all the things that we tell toddlers not to do, and we want to teach them. And so they're watching the leaders, of our country doing this. And so that can be really, I'm sure it's confusing. Recently it's gotten scary. And so just how are we going to talk about this? How do we model that to our kids? And I think it starts by us asking, how do we talk to our kids about our political beliefs? How do we do that? See, I guess okay, thank you for joining us. See, you guys are nervous as me. No. What? How do we, let me just start that again. How do you think we talk to our kids about politics? Where does it begin?
Well, it might. I think it might start with just asking them questions. Hey, what are you seeing? Just seeing what their perspective is. I think one of the worst things ever. I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked in the United States Senate, kind of close out of college, and that was my whole dream. Was I'm gonna rise the ranks of politics, and I'm gonna, not as a candidate, but I'm just gonna kind of work behind the scenes. And in fact, my first day in the United States Senate was the day that the House managers delivered the impeachment papers on Clinton. So I was in the well of the Senate the first week.
Wow.
Of the first day of the trial. And I was so excited to be there. And I quickly realized how much everyone couldn't wait to tell you their opinion on everything. And no one was interested in hearing what I had to say. And I thought, boy, everybody is like this. Everybody can't wait to tell you what their opinion is, and they don't want to listen at all. So starting from a posture of listening,
right,
even with your kids, tell me what your perspective is before I start ramming down your throat what the situation is from my perspective.
Yeah, and BJ, I'm with you, because right before we hit the record button for this broadcast, I wrote down 2 words: questions, listen. So we need to make sure we're asking our kids really good questions, truly out of curiosity, like, what are you really thinking? And then listening to them. And of course, a 7-year-old's question, the way we ask the question would be different maybe from a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old. And so we have to think about, what are the really good questions we can ask them to really elicit a response. And then we need to listen. And not just then, okay, let me ask another question, but really listen and then ask follow-up questions and then listen. Tell me more. Really, why do you think that? So starting with those questions, BJ, totally in with you. We have to understand what's their heartbeat, what are they thinking, and we need to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and definitely slow to become angry when we're talking about politics.
I only lasted 6 months before I had enough and I left. And so here's the thing. You're so quick to give your opinion. You think you're winning people over, but really you're losing them. Like, you want to know why we're polarized? Because everybody can't wait to tell you their opinion. And it's like, okay, I want to move away from. And so if you see people moving away from you, that's a great clue to be quiet and start listening a little bit more.
Yeah, and one of the things I noticed, I had worked as an intern after college at Capitol Hill for senator, and then I've been working with several different governors in the state of Florida over the years, and have been involved in the political arena as well. And I really enjoyed doing that because government is an institution that was originally established by God, and it is to be used. We're trustees of the governments that we have, and we need to treat them and the people that are involved in government respectfully. And one of the things I think about when I look at what I've seen in politics at the federal, state, and local level is we need to think about our true north as individuals and what do we value most. And there's a lot of great public officials that go into office with that true north, with valuing things, and then somehow, some way, compromise gets in the way. They're influenced by other people speaking their life, and it becomes challenging. Not everybody, but that often happens. And so one of the things that I think that we really need to embed in our children's minds and their hearts is, what is the true north for our family? What do we as a family value most? What are the issues based on that we care about the most? And so those are things that I think are fundamental before we do anything with our kids about politics, that we need to establish, and we need to make sure that we discuss with them on a regular basis. Again, we need to understand what are the issues that we care about so that we can talk about them, and then look at candidates and those that are running for office or in office. Does that align with our true north, with what we value most, with what we believe? And that's kind of that learning to discerning what those issues are and how do we apply them.
So when you think about this in terms of media and what kids are taking in and what we are taking in, I think there's, Mark, you and I talked about this earlier about considering the source. How do we talk to our kids about where they're getting their information? Because we have a friend, and she'll do this with her kids. There'll something happen, and she'll show them headlines on each side, and she'll say, this one, the exact same thing happened, but this side's saying this, and this side is saying this, just to get them to see, hey, there's filters. How do we talk to our kids about that? Because I know my daughter during COVID would come flying down the stairs and tell me something she would find on TikTok, and I would try to, it's TikTok, you can't listen to that. Then I'm thinking, but I have nowhere to send her. Like, I can't say, don't listen to that, listen to this, because she's just living in the TikTok world that adults are living in that way. How do we talk to our kids about considering the source?
And this is not a one and done, it's an ongoing conversation when we consider the source. Literally just the other night, when there was coverage of the debate and then some subsequent news coverage as well. Actually, I was sitting with my adult daughter, and we were looking at one news outlet that really stood on one end, and then and we were talking about it. I say, well, there's not any really news outlets that are truly unbiased, and as there are not people that are completely, perfectly unbiased. And so, let's listen to what they have to say here. And so let's do that. Now let's switch to another news outlet and let's watch what they're saying. And then we talked about, isn't that amazing, the difference in what they're saying about candidates and relating to candidates in issues. And so we considered the source. And then when we said, now let's talk about that and what do we believe? What do we think about that versus just consuming whatever sources we listen to, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or cable news or something else. And that's why what we talked about before is so important, that we have to really think about what is our truth, what do we value most, what do we believe are the most important issues of the day that we need to understand and stand strong on.
That's good.
I like that. I mean, it's whenever you get somebody's perspective, you just have to understand that you're getting a small kind of piece of the pie, and you've got to explore kind of the different to get to kind of a 360. I kind of, one of the things that I talk to my kids about is just kind of imagine how things would change if we just assumed that the person we were talking to knew more than we did. It doesn't mean that they do know more than what we do, but like if we just assumed they know more than we do and almost give legitimacy to it's almost, instead of prove to you prove to me you're not an idiot, kind of starting with that.
Right.
If you started with that, then you're probably going to have a negative, no matter what they say, you're going to have a negative impression. But if you kind of start with, they probably know more than I do, so let me start with that attitude, then I think you're more willing to just kind of learn more. And so getting the different perspectives around. I love the fact that you switched, because a lot of people, I think the problem is a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to get all of my information from Fox News. I'm going to get all of my information from MSNBC, including the perspective from, I'm going to get my Republican side of things from MSNBC, where it's a straw man that they just rip down, and Fox News creating that for the other side. And so, yeah, it just gives you a very limited, position to kind of view the stuff. I love that you get a 360 degree.
So we're saying to our kids, hey, this is a version of quote unquote truth. BJ, what I'm hearing from you is, hey, assume they know more than me. I think what you're saying too is, hey, let's respect each other. No matter who you're talking to, let's respect each other. So we're saying to our kids, like, okay, consider the source, and then I think at the end of the day, as dads, and again, political topics, you could go in a million different directions, but I think that just decide who and what we want to be. Like, who do we want to be? And Mark, you were talking about, as a Christian, you were talking about this verse, and I thought, man, this settles it,
Yeah, and I want to make sure we address that issue, Ted, and it reminded me that of a conversation we had before the podcast was we need to make sure we have, again, that true north, that plumb line, because if we don't have that, we don't have anything to measure our position on issues against, or how we say things, or what we say. So again, that's really critical to have. And then with our kids, I want to make sure they have permission to speak freely. Right. And after all these years with my kids being adults now, they all feel very much permission to speak freely. And so they do that with me. And so if I'm saying one thing and then all of a sudden I'm watching something, I'll say, yeah, and I'll say something that is not aligned with what I've taught them, then they can call me out. Right. And I want them to do that. And I can apologize or say, hey, my bad, I shouldn't have done that. You're right. But I think it really is the scripture that comes to my mind is 1 Corinthians 11, 1 through 2, is to follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. And so I'm not saying follow my example all the time, just follow my example if I'm really walking in truth and I'm walking in love and I'm doing the things that God has called me to do as a Christian. And so that is really ultimately for our kids, that's what they need to see. The old cliche is, kids learn more from what's caught than taught. And of course, we all know that's true. So am I setting the example in everything I do? Do I want them to follow my example? And my hope is yes.
One of the resources that has been really helpful for Nancy and I has been a book that our friend Sarah Anderson wrote. It's called The Space Between Us, How Jesus Teaches Us to Live Together When Politics and Religion Push Us Apart. It's an incredible story, but she's really talks a lot about, and her story is fascinating, about how she and her family navigate the differences that they have, and how they treated her when she had differences about how to handle that. And it's brought so much perspective in terms of how we're treating each other. And so I think for us, at least at our house, one of the things that we've tried to do, and we're not always great at this, but it started happening kind of early on when our kids were hearing a lot more during COVID, is no labels, don't call people names or be rude. I mean, we're not gonna name call. I felt like we were going back to toddlers. No, we're not name calling. So in that moment, and that was one of the things we talked about. We got to model that, and in our passion, which is totally understandable. If you are very passionate about topics and issues, of course you are. Of course you should be, totally understandable. But just these simple things of no labels, don't call people by names or be rude. Another one was everybody's a somebody. Politicians are real people, not characters. And Sarah's dad actually ran for president. And she said that they would see things on the news and she'd say, that's not my dad. You're talking about my dad and I can't do anything about it. And she said it broke her heart. And that she said it went from, I loved politics, wanted to be a part of it, to, BJ, like you, to go, I got so close. I'm like, you're being unkind. She's like, remembered that they're real people and not characters on TV. Which I think is powerful.
He ran for president of the United States?
Yes.
Okay. A friend of mine ran for local office, and the incumbent went negative on him. and it was super painful. And so all of a sudden all these negative things are being said about him around the town. And yeah, I just can't imagine. I don't know why you would want to do it.
I don't either. I don't either, but it's a good thing somebody does, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not wired that way.
The other thing she said is, be humble. Opinions can be said in an honoring way. Yeah. You can have opinions. Of course we are. We need to talk about. We can't talk about our values if we don't talk about our opinions. But just still speak in an honorable way. And I thought this was important. Not everybody in the same party is the same, because we've become so polarized, and it's such a label hanging over people's head. People are going, wait a minute. Not everybody is like that, believes that, because I think we've so done that. It's like this purity too. It's like you're either in, you got to be all in, or you're not in, and that's confused. There's no room for nuance, right? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it plays into this whole, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. Everything's got to be black and white. And everybody wants to think of themselves as the hero. And so particularly to what Mark is talking about, if you're a Christian, you're not the hero. Let me just make that very clear. You're not the hero. There's one hero and it's not you. But everybody wants to act like they're the hero in the story, they're the good side, and the other side is the bad side. And in order to make that crystal clear, we got to demonize the other side.
That's why I continue to really bang the podium in saying that's why we have to remember our true north. We have to understand and remember, and our kids need to know this, what are the things that we value most, and what are the issues that we value most, and then measure everything against what we value most, and that true north. And so that's absolutely critical in everything that we do. That's
right. Yep. And in that, to say this is what we believe, and out of that, how we communicate that, how we talk about that, that's important. And finally, one of the things is we don't have to agree to respect each other. That's just, to me, that's one of the biggest lessons that kids are not seeing. There's not respect for a different opinion. There's not a respect for, or even how to handle it. I mean, how are you impassioned? How are you standing up for the things and the people that you want to stand up for, and rightly so? How do you do that in a way that, if we're looking at our true north of who we want our kids to see and who we want them to grow up to be?
And I think that's what gets back to what BJ originally talked about at the top of our podcast, was really asking questions, then listening, not only with our own kids, but we want them, when we're talking to other adults, for example, and our kids are listening or watching, or someone's over for dinner, or we're out with another family, is ask them questions if they don't agree with what we believe on the issues, and just say, okay, tell me more, instead of just getting in their face and you're wrong and this is it. Just tell me more about that. Oh, really? How did you come to that conclusion? Okay, and why is that? And just
Right.
continuing to go deeper and deeper, and it may challenge them or challenge you on what
Right.
they believe about the issues, and maybe help them determine what is it that they value most.
I like that. And I think this is one of those things more than ever. It's like, this is one of the ones, kids, you can call me out on this, right? This is one of those which can be annoying, especially when we're in passion. Like, you're going, and they're like, Dad, I thought you said. So I think this is one of those things for all of us.
Yeah.
Oh, I've had my kids on many different occasions, not just on political things, but other things, say, Dad, do you think you should say that?
Yeah.
Dad, I thought you told us we should do this. So that's convicting. And those are times when, when I fumble the ball and I have to pick it up and then apologize to them and say, you're right,
good.
my bad, and thank you. And thank you for pointing that out to me.
That's good.
I just kind of wanted to add this part to the conversation. If you are just surrounded by people who are like-minded, like in terms of your friends, if you don't have friends that have like deeply opposing views, you really are missing out. My roommate in college, he's still to this day, he's my best friend, this guy Jesse, and we used to get into such arguments, and he would drive me crazy because he was like Mark, he was like so logical, and then I would get into a discussion with somebody else, and we'd be talking, and I'd be replicating all of Jesse's arguments, and I'm like, boy, he's really sharpened me, and then I would overhear him getting into a discussion with somebody about the same, and he was replicating my arguments, whereas I thought he just where we were just kind of sharpening one another on the different perspectives of how you can look at something, and it's like the two Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Scalia, were such good friends, and they're exact opposites. And they had this great friendship, and they would always just, you mentioned respect. They had such admiration for each other, but they were so opposed. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when he died, said, it was the best because I knew I had to be on my game, and I had to have it absolutely sharp in order to, he made her better. So there's opportunity here to, again, really learn things from other people and if we could just get rid of the hate and the pride and whatever else is involved in this and engage. And again, my friend Jesse and I, we talked today, we're still on opposite sides of things, but he has opened my eyes to so many things, and it's such a gift. Even when I'm getting mad at what he's saying, and why am I getting mad at what he's saying?
Yeah, and that is out there where people really are treating each other respectfully. People really are friends, even if they have opposing views. And that just reminded me, your example of the Supreme Court justices, former President Clinton, former President
Bush.
H.W. Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, they became good friends after the presidency. Used to fly around and do some relief work together and helping other people, and just became great chums. And I remember hearing President Bush speak about that and how they really admired one another. So that can take place, and I think there is a lot of hope that we have a number of people out there, and well-intentioned people on both sides of the aisle, from all political parties, that really do care about our country. They care about our families, about our children, about our direction for the future. And so I think there is an opportunity, and there is a lot of hope where there could be a brighter future.
Absolutely. The bad news makes the news, right? And so to say, hey, there are lots of great relationships like that. There are things going on, and maybe pointing our kids to those examples to say, hey, there is good hope there, and there's a good way to do this. This is not impossible. It can feel impossible, but it's not impossible. So I think our bottom line for this episode is we can teach our kids to talk about politics in an honoring way. And I think the pro move of the week, if you've got smaller kids, I'd just pay attention to how they're reacting, then ask questions based on what you're seeing them. A lot of little kids, if they're not tuned in yet, good. Bigger kids, ask how they can talk about politics in an honoring way. Just talk to your kids about them. Start those conversations. And Mark, I love it because every time you're on this episode, Mark, I love it because every time you're on the podcast, you will say, hey, ask kids questions and listen. And it's such a novel thing. I'm always listening. That's a great idea. But I think it really applies to this. And I think there's great hope there. There's great hope that we can leverage this tough time to kind of teach our kids and allow them to speak into our lives. Because, Mark, my kids are getting like yours, where they have the freedom to do that. And I'm like, oh, you're right. You're right. So, dads, we don't have it figured out, but thanks for journeying with us. Thanks for listening. We hope that you and your kids will be glad you did.